All right, we're back with the Salem News reporters from the newsroom. Paul Leighton and Dustin Luca. Gentlemen, welcome back. So great to see you guys.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
And you see that Dustin is our man in the street. He's actually in Salem right now, which is pretty cool. This is like, breaking news. Dustin, it looks like you can actually traverse the streets right now, and that's kind of unusual for this time of year in Salem.
Yeah, it is. I mean, interestingly enough, so I'm going to flip my camera real quick because we actually just had one of the trolleys go down the pedestrian mall here. So those are full and going around. Right now here on the pedestrian mall, there's a little bit of a crowd, so it's not getting too busy, but it's also a Wednesday. I know it's a Thursday today. So I know last week this time we were talking, or 2 weeks ago, they had just said that all the parking lots were full at 11 o'clock. So I don't know where the parking lots are at this point, but interestingly enough, this morning I've been on the Salem Ferry. I was riding it this morning into Boston at 7 a.m. and then back into Salem at 9:30 to 10:30 to kind of see who's riding it and things like that, because the city keeps talking about how we need to try to get cars off the road and everything like that because it's getting impossible to get through the city. So, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I found, I talked to 5 groups of people going into Boston. 2 of them were actually tourists. So there were people that are coming to Salem, and then to escape Salem, they're going to Boston during the off days, which was really weird. It's because I was expecting all the tourists to be in Boston coming to Salem, which of course the ride back was overflowing. And, it was, I think the Bowditch is built for 145 people. They were at 141 when they had to basically cut it off. So people are kind of looking at different options for getting to the city just because we're getting into that peak season, but everything is kind of tightening up right now because there's just so many people coming out here.
Yeah, I've seen in Gloucester, anecdotally, a number of tourists who are staying in Gloucester to visit Salem. But I don't know, maybe Paul can chip in this too. I was coming home from Bridgewater last Saturday about 5:30 on 128. And where the Liberty Tree Mall is heading north, traffic was on that Salem, off of 128 to go to Salem. It was backed up for miles. And what's it like in both Salem and Beverly? But Paul, can we start with you? Has the Salem traffic affected Beverly at all?
I mean, not that I've seen that much, obviously, unless you're heading, over the bridge into Salem, but I think people are pretty aware of that and only go if they need to, but it's not like you get, extra traffic that I know of, spilling over into the city or anything.
Well, that's good to know because Dustin, we were just thinking about it, like, if we want to go to Salem right now, we're not going to get there. So
Yeah, when it comes to getting here, the big issue is actually really in Peabody, because that's where, if you want to get from 128 to Salem, you're going through Peabody to get to North Salem. And that's how Gloucester's getting here. That's how Essex is getting here, Newburyport. So it's what you were talking about there is one of those Lowell Street, I think, exits, in Peabody that just gets backed up for miles and miles and miles. And it happens every October. That's why they basically say, don't take your car to Salem. And if you are going to take your car to Salem, at least take it to like Lynn or Beverly and then take the train the rest of the way. Because otherwise you're going to get everybody's going to get here via 128 and everybody's going to take exactly the same exit. So Peabody always becomes a choke point for trying to get in the city. And then Lynn a little bit as well, just because you're coming from that direction on, like Highland Avenue or something like that. But that's where they have the shuttles and everything like that. Like they have a shuttle at the high school, they have a shuttle at the hospital. So they have options for dealing with that. But because downtown is kind of in the north side of the city, it's a little tough to have options on the north side to basically stop that crush that you have in Peabody.
Okay, thank you for that update. All right, Paul, my brother lives on Cape Coral, right next to Sanibel Island down in Florida. And they got clobbered. My brother's place, fortunately, was spared. But you've had some interesting reporting on a task force that went down to help out the hurricane victims.
Yes, so this is the FEMA task force that's based here in Beverly. They have this compound right next to Beverly Airport, and it's comprised of people from all over the North Shore, like firefighters, police, paramedics, doctors, engineers. They've been responding to disasters across the country for years. They were one of the first teams to respond to 9/11. So they responded to the hurricane a couple of weeks ago down in Florida. They came back last week, and I went up there when they arrived and talked to a few of them. But there was, we've all seen the pictures and the videos on TV, but just to hear them describe, and these are people that have been to a lot of different disasters around the country. But what stood out to them, so they were in the Fort Myers Beach area, and they said the devastation was, blocks and blocks, sort of as far as you could see down the road, where houses were just, torn apart. And it was mostly from the flooding, from the storm surge. And one of the team members said how there were no, water lines on the houses. In other words, there was no indication of how high the water went, because it was so high, it went over the houses.
Whoa.
That's how high the storm surge was. So that really struck me. And another team member said how a lot of the homes have been built on stilts to prevent, a problem when there's flooding. And then but again, the storm surge was so high, it just knocked the houses off the stilts. So you'd see rows and rows of these stilts with no houses on them. So anyway, it's and they have a video, I think it's up on their website, that shows a lot of the scenes. So anyway, it's good to, we've always done these stories when there were these disasters around this country. It's nice to see we have this local team of people. They volunteer a lot of their time. They do get paid when they're sent out on these missions. They get paid for that time. I mean, they're gone for a week or two at a time, but otherwise they do lots of training up here in Beverly at their compound. And they're a search and rescue team, mostly, I should say. That's what their main job is. But it's a lot of volunteer efforts by these people.
Wow, that's good to know. And there are some Beverly folk and people from Cape Ann all around here.
Yeah, one of the newer members, it was kind of interesting just to me as someone who covers Beverly, Mike Hollins, who's the commissioner of Public Works and Engineering in Beverly. He's been around for years, and he just joined the team. I didn't realize that he joined it recently. Said his kids are older, he has more time, and so he responded to this disaster down there. So yeah, there's a lot of local people involved. Wow.
All right. I'm enjoying the tour of Salem as Dustin gets his steps into. I really am. This is really cool and unique. Dustin, I don't know where we want to go from here. Do we want to go back to haunted happenings and what's going on in Salem, or you have other things you want to mention?
Well, we can really quickly just, since we were just talking about haunted happenings, the last 2 weekends are coming up at this point. So, and they're kind of expecting there to be a little bit of spillover into November as well. So that first November weekend, it's going to be a little busy, but the next 2 weekends are really going to be kind of the peak time. So if you're planning on coming to the city, plan ahead, get your reservations, if you can even get them at this point, because the last 2 weekends are always a madhouse. Don't bring a car to the city, obviously, and try to enjoy everything. If you're planning on not coming during October, it might be even better to come during November, because then there's really not going to be anybody here. The businesses will all be relying on you. So,
well,
right now
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say October, it's everybody's here to play. And then, once November hits, that's when, the locals get to play again. So,
yeah. Except you can sort of get the flavor of Salem all year long, from what I've
these days. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to come back to you too, to mention stories that you are working on. And Paul, I want to go back to a couple of quick things for you. You mentioned in the paper, in the articles here, you've got a couple of things on the Beverly Birth Center is still in the news. And I guess that's it. Plus, what's going on over at Gordon with respect to building apartments and so on.
Right, with the North Shore Birth Center, we've talked about this quite a bit. Beverly Hospital and Beth Israel Lahey Health, they're planning to close the birth center. There's a group of citizens have organized against it. And anyway, the latest story was that I found out that the Massachusetts Department of Public Health sent a letter to Beverly Hospital a few weeks ago, basically warning them not to close the birth center early. And if they do, they could face fines. So the story is that the proponents of keeping the birth center open say the hospital is basically closing it without going through this approval process that they need to do. They've reduced the number of patients. They're no longer accepting any pregnant patients. And I talked to a midwife who works here. They basically have a handful of postpartum patients there now. So the advocates for keeping the center open say, well, it's basically closed already while they're in talks with the hospital to keep the birth center open. So there's a lot of controversy there, but it's kind of striking to me that there was this actual letter from the Department of Public Health warning the hospital not to close earlier. They could be fined. So there's going to be more to come on that. We'll see how it turns out.
Does that mean once the patients that they have now are, for want of a better word, serviced, then they can close? Is that the idea?
Well, they have to, in order to close, for a hospital to close what they call an essential service, there's this whole, regulatory process they have to go to. The state can actually stop them from closing it, but they need to provide basically an alternative, explain where people can get this service elsewhere.
Okay.
And then the Department of Public Health needs to review all that. So those are the steps they haven't taken yet. So they paused this process, this regulatory process. So they haven't completed it yet. So they can't close it until they do that.
All right. What's the deal with Gordon College and apartments over there?
Yeah, so at Gordon Conwell Seminary in Hamilton, they had a deal with Harbor Light Community Partners, which is an affordable housing group based here in Beverly, to sell 6 of the seminary's dormitories to Harbor Light, and they were turning into apartments. But the bottom line is that at this point, Harbor Light agreed to withdraw from that agreement at this point because the town of Hamilton wants to do a study along with the seminary, looking at the overall use of the whole campus. So the whole campus is about 100 acres, and the seminary said, they announced earlier this year that they're planning to sell either all, part or all of it and move to Boston. So that's the underlying story. So before Harbor Light goes ahead with this deal to develop these 6 dormitories, they're going to wait till the town and the cemetery do a larger study. What could be used in this campus? This is 100 acres in the town, a lot of wooded area, obviously. And so they want to just get a look at what could be the future uses of this campus before they go ahead with this individual project.
All right, Dustin, we've lost your picture. There you are. I want to ask you a couple of things, maybe on teasing what you're working on. And I think personally for me, I'm interested in what you're going to be reporting on after Election Day. I think that's going to be fascinating in the area. But what would you like to promote upcoming in the Salem News?
I mean, really, because, covering Salem, all I'm really working on right now is Halloween. And what's interestingly enough is the city itself kind of slows down a little bit too. And all you really have going on is planning for Halloween. So the only other thing I've really been working on, I actually just covered North Shore Breakfast or North Shore Chamber of Commerce breakfast, looking at the ballot questions, which is kind of an interesting situation because you've got 4 ballot questions and a book that's coming in that a lot of people seem to be getting really confused by, especially where you've got a referendum where voting for the referendum actually keeps the law in place. So there's a bunch of confusion about that. The reason why I'm mentioning it is because there was a little bit of confusion over what exactly is going to be going on with the 3rd article, which is looking at expanding the use of the sales of alcohol and things like that. And one of the things that was really interesting about it that kind of came out of the chamber forum is the fact that a lot of the industry, grocery stores and things like that are actually, they're not necessarily in favor, they're not in opposition of this movement, but they're not getting in the way, but the opposition is being funded by Total Wine. Overall, what this seeks to do is it seeks to kind of boost the way that mom and pop grocery stores and things like that can play for licenses, gives them kind of better access to it. But then there's also some drawbacks on the other side. One of them is that businesses that violate the state laws for alcohol, now if this thing were to pass, instead of being fined based on what they're selling on alcohol, they're going to be fined based on what they're selling in period. So if you're selling scratch tickets, if you're selling gasoline or something like that, you could actually be fined for selling alcohol to a minor. So there's all this kind of discussion going about that. So I would recommend to anybody who's of voting age to make sure you read up on the questions, because they're all pretty big, they're all pretty heavy, and they're not very clear if you look at them. So you want to make sure you do your homework.
I do want to say that we're going to link to your story because I found that you made it quite clear on several of those things for me, and it was well written because you showed using quotes of people on opposition and in favor of, and you wrote that very well. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna link to that.
Yeah, and it took 45 inches to do that, which, I mean, for us, Paul could tell you that 45 inches is ridiculous. You're going to lose a reader at 30. but there was just so much going on, and there's so much on the ballot that it's impossible to not do a massive story on it.
Yeah, well, I found it fascinating, and it sure kept my interest. So thank you. We'll be looking forward to the reporting from Salem. It sounds pretty wild already. What is it? 11:30 in the morning as we record this. Fun time.
Yeah, it's definitely been picking up here. I mean, look at the crowd. You know, there's actually a lot of, and I'm right in the middle of somebody's photo. Whoops.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's cool.
Horrible.
Yeah, it's a lot of people for a Wednesday morning already. Paul, what about you? What would you like to mention about what you're working on, or what we should be paying attention to?
Well, if Dustin can pick me up a cup of coffee before he comes back, that would be good. And yeah, sort of the ongoing story. I know, again, we've talked about this, but there was a public meeting last week on the problem with the two bridges in Beverly. And, there were more than 100 people showed up at a meeting at the high school, most of them very upset. And the basic story is it's going to take at least 13 years to replace these two bridges in Ralside and Beverly, the Kernwood Bridge and the Hall Whitaker Bridge. They're going to sort of alternate doing one and then doing the other one. So it's really kind of a mess. And they had officials from the State Department of Transportation there, and I mean, they acknowledged that's obviously it's a long time. They said they have more than 600 bridges in the state need to be replaced. So that's your problem right there.
So you're going to be reporting on this for the next 13 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we look forward to that. That's for sure.